So it's been about 4 months since the launch of the PSVR 2, and I have to say I'm having a great time with it. So much so, in fact, that I've probably spent more time in the PSVR 2 than any other VR headset I own since I got my hands on one. The quality of the VR experience is very good, and I would say it's comparable to a high-end gaming PC, but without the expense and the hassle of dealing with drivers and updates. The PSVR 2 game library started off pretty small, but it's already grown to over 100 titles listed on the PlayStation Store. One of my favourite VR games right now is Gran Turismo 7 in VR, and that's coming from me who's never really been a fan of VR sim racing before. I've also moved my regular Beat Saber sessions to PSVR 2, and last weekend I finished Red Matter 2, which was an absolutely stunning VR experience and a must-own title on the system in my opinion. However, despite all this praise, there's a glaring problem that's been on my mind ever since the PSVR 2 launched that I feel could be preventing the platform from growing in the future. I touched on this very briefly in my initial review of the headset, and I was kind of hoping that Sony would have addressed it by now, but that's not the case. So here's my open letter to Sony, and feel free to chime in and share what you think in the comments down below. So the problem in my mind with the PSVR 2 is the complete lack of support for VR newcomers. Now, if you're like me and you're someone that's experienced with VR, jumping into the PSVR 2 isn't going to be a problem, as we're used to how it feels to play VR content, and we've developed what many refer to as our VR legs. But for someone that's a complete beginner that's never touched VR before, PSVR 2 poses a few problems. Now, put yourself in their shoes for a second. You've seen the ads, you've seen the videos online, you get excited and you go out and you pick one up. You get it home, you calibrate the eye tracking, you scan your room, you set up your boundary, then what? You're dumped straight into the PS5's main menu without any direction on what to expect or where to start. You're completely on your own. Now, you might be tempted to jump into one of the key titles that launched alongside the PSVR 2, like Horizon Call of the Mountain, for example. Now, don't get me wrong, Horizon is a fantastic game and I absolutely loved the experience from start to finish, but it's a terrible introduction to VR for newcomers. I've hosted about a dozen PSVR 2 demos for my friends and family since its launch, and when I put them into Horizon, everyone loves the initial boat ride experience. Looking around and taking in the scale of the machines with many wow moments. But every single one of them, every single time, completely noped out when it came to the climbing sections, because the movement is just too intense for them. And this is a big problem. And it's not just Horizon. I've seen many posts from people online asking about how to deal with VR motion sickness, and even going so far as people listing their headsets for sale after jumping straight into intense games like Horizon, Resident Evil Village, or Gran Turismo 7 as their first VR experience. The problem is, there's no official guidance or best practice on what's best to play if you're new to PSVR 2, so you can hardly blame these people for feeling this way. But there are at least 3 solutions that I can think of that would drastically help improve the experience, which I think in turn would help the platform grow in the future, or at the very least, prevent people from returning their headsets. So firstly, Sony needs to create a comfortable onboarding experience. For example, ASTRO's PLAYROOM came pre-installed on every PS5 console as a way to introduce players to the PS5's new features and the new DualSense controller. So to not have something similar to introduce new players to PSVR 2 is a huge missed opportunity and part of the problem in my mind. I feel that once you've gone through the initial headset setup, you should immediately be led into an introductory VR experience. Another Astrobot experience could be great, but with Sony owning some incredible IPs, just imagine if after the setup you were transported to Midgard where you got to meet Kratos and Atreus from God of War, for example. Together, they could teach you the basic VR mechanics like grabbing and throwing the Leviathan axe, and they could talk you through comfort settings and show you the difference between teleportation and smooth locomotion, explaining that smooth locomotion can be intense for some players. Sony could also use this opportunity to highlight unique features of the headset, such as eye tracking and headset haptics. Imagine if you weren't looking at Kratos during this introduction and he slaps you around the head to make sure you're paying attention. You certainly wouldn't forget something like that. This short introduction could end with a boss battle putting everything you learnt to the test. And I feel that players would leave this introduction armed with the basic VR knowledge, and it would likely leave a lasting first impression. And this leads me on to my second suggestion. Once the introductory experience is over, it should be extremely clear on the store what VR games and experiences are comfortable for all players. Now this could easily be fixed by simply adding comfort ratings to all the PSVR 2 games listed on the store. To Meta's credit, they've done this from day one with 3 ratings: comfortable, moderate, and intense. These ratings provide clear and vital information to VR players so they can make an informed decision and choose the right content to suit their comfort level. There's plenty of great comfortable games on the store, but it's difficult to know where to start without some guidance. And then, once players get more experienced and feel more comfortable, they can then experiment with more moderate and intense rated games. And finally, I feel that Sony should provide more demo-style experiences that wow players without complicated movement or interactions. One of the key things that Sony did so right with the original PSVR was that they had dozens of amazing short experiences with 3 demo discs packed full of content and the amazing PlayStation VR Worlds collection. A lot of these VR experiences were fantastic to demo to friends and family to really highlight the magic of VR, but we just don't seem to have many demos like that on the PSVR 2. So, to summarize, Sony could improve the PSVR 2 platform by offering a better onboarding experience for newcomers, providing comfort ratings for the store, and having more short demo experiences highlighting what VR has to offer. We all know that VR is incredibly immersive, and it can be wonderful when you can experience intense games without nausea, but we really need to look after the people on the platform, especially newcomers, so it can grow beyond the enthusiast market. What we really don't want is players aimlessly wandering straight into the deep end with really intense games, having a bad experience, and writing off VR altogether. So that's what's been on my mind for a little while. To be fair, Steam VR is just as bad when it comes to onboarding new users, and they also don't have comfort ratings on the store, but I do feel that PSVR 2 is much more accessible than PC VR, so it should be much clearer and it should cater for a much broader audience. As I said at the beginning, I'm a big fan of the PSVR 2, so know that this feedback is coming from a good place, and I genuinely want Sony to succeed in the future. They have about 6 months before the holidays, which I feel is going to be a critical time for their platform to grow, so implementing some of this stuff in my mind would make a real big difference. But of course, this is all just my opinion. I'd love to know what you all think in the comments down below. Leave a little like to help this video reach the right people at Sony. Make sure you're subscribed for all my future VR content. And as always, I'll see you all on the next one. Cheers.